Welcome to our second in the series, Jesus Can Relate. We're talking today about Jesus and his friendships, just the natural affinity that Jesus had, of course, because he loves all people. But there is if you will, a pattern of relationships that we see in the scriptures that I think is a very biblical pattern. Some people have called it, there's an author that calls it concentric circles of concern. But there's a pattern in Jesus' life of relationships that I think we can give us a healthy balance and boundary and even a model. And we'll just talk about that for a second. We also use this in our church. You'll see it's called circles of discipleship. If you look at Christ, he came for the whole world. God so loved the whole world. So he starts in this, the multitude, Sermon on the Mount, or just the crowds that are following Jesus. And he says he looks for them and he even feels a love for them, a care. And then he goes down to about 70. If you look at John 6, it says there were some 70 people walking with him, calling themselves disciples. So that would be more like if the multitude would be just the world. The 70 might be your church or a large group of people that you interact with. And then from those 70, he calls out the 12. He, in fact, even says to the 70, you're going to have to die. I'm going to die. You may have to die. And it says in John 6 that many of them turned away. They believed in Jesus, but they weren't ready to go in deeper. And then he looks at the other 12 and says, do you need to go too? And Peter says, where would we go? Which is a great answer. So then there's the 12 that he invests his life in. He prays all night the night before, it says. He spends literally an entire evening in prayer, and then he goes and picks the 12, which he already knew. It wasn't randomly. He'd already met the fishermen, Peter, James, and John on the shore. He had already met Matthew, but he actually narrows it down to the 12, including the one that, of course, he loses. But from there, a lot of people don't realize he goes a little deeper, what we call that inner three. There are three men that they really select themselves, and he selects them. They become the inner three, Peter, James, and John. And you kind of wonder about that. Did he choose them? Did they choose him? Was he playing favorites? Were they promoting themselves? And it really doesn't feel that way if you look at it. In James, it says, James 4:8 says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And I think there was that. They wanted to go in deeper, and Jesus saw that and drew them in deeper. Him knowing his sovereignty, knowing what role they would play. And as you look, we've got a sheet there in front of you, but one would be in Mark 5:37 through 43. I won't read the whole thing, but Jesus is actually on his way to heal the daughter, the centurion's daughter. He gets stopped by the hemorrhaging woman, and I love that he's available. But then he goes ahead, and if you want to look at that, there's just some couple of key lines about Peter, James, and John. If we look at 5, let's see, we're starting in 35. Mark 5:35. While he was speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, your daughter is dead. So that must have been frustrating because he already stopped for someone else. By the time he's moving there, the daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? What a hard thing to say. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. So that dad is waiting for Jesus impatiently, and he finds out that his daughter is dead. Imagine that feeling. It's kind of like Lazarus with Mary and Martha. Jesus says, believe. And listen to this in 37. This is where we're headed. He allowed no one to follow him to the healing except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And I'll just stop there for time. But when he gets there, they're already starting the funeral. The Jewish wailers, there's loud moaning. I mean, it's like Lazarus. She is dead. But Jesus brings them in, and just the four of them, and he heals her, Talitha Kum. They see a raising of the dead for the first time. Just those three, not the other 12. What's that about? And there are other examples of that we'll show you here in a minute. But I want to think about the three. Who's the multitude in your life? Who's the 70? Is there a church? Is there that you feel like there's a larger community? Who are the maybe 10 or 12 that are deeper than acquaintance, friend, deeper friend, small group, some sort of a community that you're part of? And we provide all those, and a healthy church will. And then there's the 3 or the 4. They may be lifelong friends. They may be someone that just God brings in your heart. But we want to talk about those 3. Not that 3 is the magic number, but I have my good friend here, Alan Keister, and we want to talk a little bit about who are those 3? Who are those several friends that, like, when in a crisis, when you know those are going to be the people that are going to be there for you. When I had COVID and I was quarantined, I'm like, who are the folks that I know are going to wonder where I am? Murray Gossett says that when you leave town and come back, who knew that you were gone? So how do you do that? Do you find them? Do they find you? What are some things that help and bring about those kind of friendships? So Alan's going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to talk about our friendship that God has given us to just see how that works in our life.
Thanks, Kim. I think a lot about these friendships. Guys in particular are not always very good at investing and connecting with other guys. We usually have to be doing something, right? We have to be out hunting or fishing or maybe working out together. But it's always interesting to me in looking at my own life about who God has put into my life. Because of the profession that I'm in, I'm around a lot of people. I have a lot of relationships. I know a lot of people, but it's been sort of God directing just interesting overlaps in life that tend to bring about these particular friendships. And I think about deep friendships that I've had before I moved back here. I was in residency, and there was a group of people that we met as a small group, and it was interesting because it was a couple small groups. But the guys in that small group were really tight and invested in one another, and so we would do things together without the girls. And even after we left Nashville, we would still get together for trips. And those people have been lifelong friends. Even as we sent our kids to summer camps, we would go up there and meet together and just still have time together because those were people that God sort of put in our lives as we were beginning our marriage, as we were beginning our families. And so even though our kids aren't quite as close, there's still this unique bond and connection that happened just because it was at a particular season of our life when we were starting our families and we were in the middle of training. And, there were a lot of overlaps in our lives, but they were all really centered on gospel relationships. And so as I moved back here, I'd grown up here, but I really prayed that God would put those kind of people in my life. And, there are a lot of people that I knew and I knew growing up, and I have long-term relationships, but they're not necessarily gospel-based. They're based on maybe us playing sports together, the things that bond you together with your high school buddies, but not always really gospel relationships. And so I really prayed that God would put those people in my life. And really I've been blessed to be able to see that happen in lots of ways. One of my dearest friends was a guy that I would eat lunch with every Wednesday. And we would do that over and over for years. And he happened to be a pastor at another church. And so we would spend that time. And it started out to be something sort of a little surface, what do you do? What's going on in your family? Like, what's going on in your work? But it became deeper as we spent that time together, investing in that over periods of time, to where he knew me and I knew him. And I would ask him these questions, what are you uniquely equipped by God to do? And what am I uniquely equipped to do? And so what happened out of that was, again, our relationship has changed because he's a full-time missionary in Taiwan now, because God uniquely equipped him to do that. And in a lot of ways, I think what's happened with me being able to start a ministry here in Amarillo had everything to do with somebody that was challenging me about what are you uniquely equipped to do. And so, but when he left, there was like this void, really, because it was, that friendship, which was happening weekly, that time was no longer available. Now he's around the world, and in order to communicate with him, I got to get on, FaceTime at 7 a.m. here, so it's 7 p.m. there, whatever. But I still spend time. But God still provides other relationships. So I think even, about our relationship, how we started connecting. You, back in your former life, were a drug rep, right? And so you would come to my office and we'd talk, and we would talk about medication, but you'd be much more interested in me and kind of finding out a little bit about me. We started a men's small group Bible study at my house, and I told you it was a Tim Keller study, and you're like, I like Tim Keller, and pretty soon you're coming. But we didn't immediately start connecting. But then things happened in our lives. We started coming to First Pres. Oh, Kim Talley's at First Pres. We started looking at mission opportunities. Oh, Kim Talley's looking at a mission opportunity for the Gap Group, and we're going to Honduras this year. Maybe we could connect on that. And over a period of time, God put overlaps in our lives that grew. And the next thing I know, we're like, hey, I don't even know who said, you want to go grab lunch? And pretty soon we're like, oh, let's grab lunch again and again. And so the relationship just developed, but there were lots of natural overlaps. But there was this connection that was more than a surface. It wasn't that we were, good buddies just doing a mission trip to do a mission trip, but there was gospel-centered relationship that was happening there. And we're talking about things. We're thinking about how the gospel changes, how we behave, how we do life. I'm asking you, how do I navigate life with, teenage daughters, and things that really, for me, were things that I didn't necessarily know how to maybe approach. And with your experience and what you brought to the table, it was something unique that helped me. And so, and that relationship's just continued to grow and develop over time. And it wasn't like I set out and go, you know what, I really want to be great friends with Kim Talley. It was that over a period of time, God directed those kind of things. But I don't think it was by accident either. Like, again, I prayed when I moved here that God would put men, especially in my life, that could challenge me, that could encourage me. And I think that those close, deep friends are people that God really directs. And it's not some magic formula that it happens, but I also think you have to have your eyes open, and you have to be willing to take the time to invest. And whether it's figuring out ways to connect over, hey, I want to grab lunch with you. COVID added a special challenge to our grabbing lunches together, because we're like, maybe I really shouldn't go out in public and eat. And so, you pick up lunch and bring it up to my office, and we'd sit there and have lunch, but we would have this face-to-face time together where we'd have conversations. And I think that each time we connect and meet, you get to know that person in a new and deeper way. There's a greater comfort in what you're wanting to share and communicate. And I think, again, God will put those people in your lives if you're willing to put yourself out there too, because there's a little bit of if I tell Kim Talley this, what's he going to think about me? And vice versa with people in relationship. You have to go, who can I trust, and who is God going to put in my way that I can invest in them, and they'll invest in me. And so I've been really, really fortunate to have people like Kim and people like Whit Holder and some people that God's really put in my life. Kim is a little more mature than I am. Whit's about Whit's about
chronologically. Maybe.
Yeah. But I mean, I have other friends who are at my same stage of life, and because of the ways that our relationships have developed over time, we just did life together. And it happened whether I was coaching a soccer team or going out on a hunt or being in a Sunday school class or doing life together. God puts those overlaps and they become natural. It wasn't like I tried to exclude other people. It's just these were the people that God put before me. And when he did, I looked at that as a blessing to be able to have people that were interested in me. And I think you and I have had this conversation You also have people in your lives that you know are there because they're really invested in you.
Yep.
That you have friends that rejoice when you rejoice, and they weep when you weep. There are a lot of people that come into your life that have some sort of alternative motives. Maybe they want to get to know you for whatever you have to offer them. So finding deep friendships that are really invested in you and are gospel driven versus whatever else they might be trying to get out of that relationship. And so I've been blessed to find friends that deeply want to see me grow spiritually, and can pray over me when my kid is in the hospital, and can encourage me when I'm overwhelmed by the weight of what's going on. And so I thank God for those friendships that God's put in my life. Yeah. So I think as we've been talking about friendships, and especially these deep friendships, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about is giving each other permission to speak into one another's life. Because depending on what level of friendship you're at, if I say, hey, Kim, I really think you're approaching this wrong, or Kim says, hey, I think you totally missed it on this, I think there can be this sense of judgment. There's sort of tears down or fractures the relationship in some ways. And so it really does take time to get to those points where you can speak into one another's lives. And so I even think about this illustration of the ski trip, because there's a little bit of me as I'm talking to you about that I'm thinking, oh, really, this could maybe rupture our friendship. Like this could maybe, break some things down. And what I appreciated about it is you didn't say, hey, I really thanks, but no thanks, or I didn't ask for this advice. I felt like that was a place where you sort of took what I said and processed it, and then it worked out the way it needed to, but you didn't take that as something where I was trying to belittle you or question your judgment, just to try and give you from a medical standpoint, this is what I might do. And I've had relationships where that hasn't always gone the same way. I've had relationships where I've tried to speak into somebody's life and they didn't want to hear the truth, and like those relationships didn't make it. And it was a believer. And it's not to say that relationship might not still come back around, but when I've sometimes spoken truth into their lives, hadn't always gone that well. But I think it's also really important that as we do that, we also can receive that, and having friends who can speak truth to you, where you don't feel defensive or defeated, but that they can, but that their motives are really to make you more Christ-like. And sometimes we aren't very good at looking at ourselves. We need a mirror. And so we need people to really speak truth to us, because we don't see it about ourselves. And I have people that I've said, hey, listen, if you see this, I need you to hold me accountable. And I've talked to you about some of those things. But it is hard because, especially as guys, we find our identity in things that aren't Christ. And whether that be in our work, whether that be in our relationships or power, whatever it is. And we need people to go, hey, you're kind of going off track here. You're doing a little mission drift here. And so having those people in your life is really important, because they're really gifts, right? They're really gifts to be able to help you along your spiritual journey, your sanctification, to be made more like Him. And and if you have people that are speaking truth to you and you're resisting it, you may need to ask them and ask yourself, hey, why is that? Why is that bothersome to me? Why does that offend me? And maybe it's because they're speaking truth to us. I hate to say that, but that happens sometimes. And the people that sometimes can see it the most clear are the people that you least want to hear it from, especially our family members, our spouses and stuff. And so having a friend, a gospel-driven friend, who can speak truth to you where you may not get so offended, it's really an important thing, I think, to have in your life.
Amen.
And Christ modeled that. I think we all try to think about how we can be more Christ-like, but maybe looking at relationships, this is a really important part of that process.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. Just some helpful things. So maybe in wrapping up, there was one more as we talked about those concentric circles, relationship circles, 3, 1. Again, don't get hung up in the exact number, but just that smaller group of really lifetime friends. Alan and I have talked about seasons. Sometimes we're there together. My best friend since I was 20 lives in Lubbock. We talk a lot, and you have to work on that. And social networking or technology helps a little bit, but there's a close friends in town. It's easier to see that there's maintaining long friendships. So sometimes they're just different seasons. Let's talk about one more as you go from 3 to 1. Notice that John, in his gospel, which is very interesting, John labels himself the disciple whom Jesus loved, which I think is really a very interesting, pointing to himself, but not really a prideful look at me. He didn't even name himself, but when he says 4 or 5 times in the Gospel of John, he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, Jesus loved everyone, but he saw that as Jesus really loves me. I love that about him. But we see that John in that threesome, he's the one that goes the distance. Even when Peter and James are not there, that John is the only one that's at the cross, I think, which is interesting. He's the only one left when Jesus is hanging there on the cross and has to take care of his mother. And he trusts John so much. He gives the responsibility, his earthly eldest son responsibility of taking care of his mom, to not the brothers, the blood brothers we talked about last week, but to John the disciple. John, I trust you so much. You're this close, but I am going to bequeath to you the responsibility of my mother. That just says something about that. When I'm looking at my will, so when you're filling out a will and you think about yourself and your spouse, and maybe there's no one left, and your kids are going to still be young, who is that person you'd say, I trust you I'm going to put your name in here as the person that might mediate our finances or might take care of my kids? Who would that be? If, God forbid, you were gone, who would you say, they'll take care of my kids? I trust them with my finances. I trust them with my possessions. That, again, being that kind of friend, but is there someone in your life like that may or may not be related? Very interesting in John 21, when after Christ has restored Peter 3 times, Peter does a very funny thing, and maybe you missed this little story. John is walking by or sitting there, and Peter says, what about him? And Jesus' answer is basically none of your business. He really just says, you know what, your story is your story. John's is, but he does say a very interesting thing. He says, if I want John to remain alive until I return, that's not your business. And I do love that I can look at Alan's life or Murray's life or someone and just say, well, wait, what are you going to do with them? And John, and just like, you know what, don't be jealous. Don't compare. Just say, I'm going to take care of Alan. I'm going to take care of Murray, and I'm going to take care of you. And we should rejoice in that versus, well, I can hear a little bit of Peter going, well, John is going to get more than I did because he's stuck. There's none of that. Jesus said, I don't do that. And I like that we don't compare lives, that we just share lives and we celebrate. But when Jesus says that about John, it sounds like he might live forever. It's really not, that's not what he's saying. And it actually says in John 21, there maintained this rumor that John would live forever. Well, John doesn't, but John does live longer than anybody else. John is alive when all the other 12 are gone. He's on the island of Patmos. He's an elder man. And because of his faithfulness, he lives longer, but he also gets to see the end of time. He's the one, because of his faithfulness, he gets to see the revelation. He sees the end of the world. And I think that's not a works earned thing, but I think it's just a reciprocation of John's faithfulness. John stuck with Jesus the whole way. And I love that, there's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Are we the kind of friends that will stick with it? And so just thinking about that, so just as you talk in your groups and pray about maybe those concentric circles of relationships, how do we be a good friend? How do we have a good friend? Where are those three friendships? Just kind of the things we've talked about. I think I would close with this. The good news is that we all have a best friend that never will leave us, forsake us. I love that Jesus says in John 15:15, I don't call you slaves or servants, but now I call you friends. So no matter what relationship or friendships you have on this earthly level, the great news is that you have the best friend eternally who will always be there, who will never leave you, forsake you, who will hold you in his hand and never, ever let go. So start with that friendship and then build from there. Have a great group.